Hello everyone, my name is Ashok. Welcome to our channel Ashok IT. In this Springboot video series, today we are going to discuss how to export database data to Excel file by using Springboot application. Alright, let's get started. In order to generate Excel file by using Java application, we will use one third-party API, that is Apache POI. Apache organization provided POI API. POI is open source libraries or open source API to create and manipulate various file formats. Why we need to use this Apache POI third-party API? Because in Java, there is no built-in support to work with Excel files directly. If you want to create the Excel file or if you want to read the Excel file data, Java does not have any direct support. That's why we are using Apache POI API. Here in this Apache POI API, we have several classes and methods to work with the Excel file, like HSF and XSF API is available to read, write and modify Excel spreadsheets. Alright, if you see any Excel file, here one Excel file is called as one workbook. Excel file is called as one workbook. When we open that Excel workbook, we can see sheets in the Excel file. In the Excel workbook, sheets will be available. We can create multiple sheets. Sheets will be created based on the indexes, and in one sheet multiple rows will be available, row 1, row 2, row 3, like that, and in one row multiple columns will be available. Now if you want to generate this Excel file by using our Java application, first we need to create a workbook. In that workbook we need to create the sheet. In the sheet we need to create the row. In the row we need to create the cell, and in the cell we need to store the data. So in order to do all these operations, Apache POI API provided several components. Workbook is available, sheet available, row available, cell available. Using this workbook we can create an Excel workbook. Using sheet we can create the sheet in the workbook based on the index. Inside the sheet we can create the rows based on the index. Row index will start from 0. Once the row is created, in that row we can create the cell by using index. Inside the cell we can set the cell data. So in order to generate the Excel report, we need to use these components from Apache POI API. Alright, let us see how to develop one application to generate the Excel report. Here I'm going to create one Springboot application. File, new, Spring Starter project I'm creating. I'm going to create one REST API to export this data. Springboot Excel export. Maven project I'm creating. Packaging is jar. Java version is 8. So here Springboot Excel report. Click on next. I'm using Lombok dependency. Data JPA. I need to read the data from the database. For that I'm using data JPA dependency. And MySQL database I want to connect, so I'm using MySQL driver. Web dependency to generate the REST controller, and a DevTools dependency I'm using. By using these dependencies, I'm creating the project. Guys, here directly we cannot select the POI dependency. In this STS IDE, it is not coming. We need to add that Apache POI dependency manually in our pom.xml. So Lombok to generate the setters and getters, data JPA to communicate with the database, MySQL driver to load the driver to connect with the MySQL database, web dependency to create a REST controller, DevTools to reload our code changes. Click on next and finish. Once this project is created, we need to add Excel dependency, that is POI dependency. Now here I'm taking this dependency POI over XML from Apache. Take this dependency, add this dependency in the pom.xml. I will share this source code in the Git repository. You can find the repository link in the description of this video. Yes, I'm adding the dependency details. Good. POI dependency I have added. It is downloading the dependency. It is completed. Next one, we need to communicate with the database. So data source properties I'm going to add. By default properties file is created. I'm converting the properties to YML. Nowadays people are using YML files instead of properties. In this YML we need to configure our data source properties. With which database we want to connect the database properties, we need to configure in our YML file. Here I'm configuring MySQL database which is running in my machine. I'm giving localhost, database name is SBMS, username and password, MySQL driver class, auto DDL also I'm giving. Let me check the database table. So here course details table is available. Select star from table. When we execute this query to retrieve the data, it is saying that there are 4 records available, 4 course informations available, 4 courses information is available in the database table. Now I want to develop the project which will export this table data into one Excel file. Good. Database is also ready. Data is ready. I have configured data source properties in YML. Next one. In order to read the data from the database table, we need to create one entity class and repository interface. Let me create one entity class. Class name I'm taking as course. It is a course entity. I need to map this class with the database table. To map the class with the database table, we will use JPA annotations @entity @table. Table name is course details and properties in the class, those are matching with the database table columns. Private, integer, what are the variables available? CID, CNAME, price available. Integer, CID, integer, CNAME, and private, double price. Good. These are the properties. I want to generate setters getters for these properties, so I'm using Lombok annotation @data. Good. Let me import all these packages. Yeah, perfect. Packages got imported, data imported from Lombok, table and entity annotations imported from JPA. And this is a primary key column mapped value. So I'm using @ID annotation to represent that CID is a primary key column in the database table. Perfect. Entity is ready. To retrieve the data, I'm going to create one repository interface. So let me take it as course repository. Here inside this repository, I'm extending the properties from JPA repository. So JPA repository extends JPA repository. JPA repository provided by Spring Data JPA, which is used to perform CRUD operations with the database. Without writing any logic, we can directly call the methods of JPA repository to perform those operations. Perfect. With this, my repository is also ready. Now let me write the actual business logic to generate the Excel file. Here I am writing one class called course service, or I can say it as a report service. We are generating a report, right? Let me call it as report service. In this report service, we need to build our actual logic, right? My service should talk to repository. So let me inject repository object into my service class by using auto wiring. Course repository with the help of auto wide annotation. To represent this service as a Spring Bean, I'm using one annotation called @service. @service and repository object is also injected into our service. Now let's write the actual method. Public void generate Excel. Here I'm taking HTTP servlet response as a parameter. The reason is when user send a request directly, that Excel file should be downloaded in the browser. So I need to send that Excel file as a response. That's the reason I'm taking HTTP servlet response object as a parameter. Whatever the Excel file that I'm going to generate by using this method, that Excel file I will add in the response object and I will send it to the client directly. Good. So with this we are able to write our service method. Now what is the logic that we need to write in the service method? First we need to get the data from the database. Course repo dot find all. When I call the find all, it is going to give me list of courses available in the database table. List of records available in the database table. Once we got the list of records, as we discussed, we need to create a workbook. In the workbook, we need to create the sheet. In the sheet, we need to create the row. In the row, we need to create the cell. In the cell, we need to set the data. Good. So first let me create a workbook. HSF workbook I am creating. It is a predefined class available in Apache POI API. HSF workbook, I'm going to take this as workbook is equal to new HSF workbook. Workbook object got created. Once the workbook is created, inside that workbook we need to create a sheet. Workbook dot create sheet. For the sheet you can give the name also. I'm giving the name as courses info. Courses info. Let us store this sheet into one variable, HSF sheet. Once the sheet is created, in the sheet we need to create the row. Sheet dot create row. As discussed, row will have a index. First I want to create the header row. So I mean table data, metadata. Here ID, here name, then here price. Like this I need to set the data like this: ID, name and price. So the first row I'm going to consider as a header row to represent metadata. One row is created based on the index. In that row we need to create the cell. This one row is created. In that row we need to create the cell. Row index will start from 0. Cell index also will start from 0. Once the row is created, based on that row object we are going to create the cell. Row dot create cell, cell of 0 dot set cell value. I'm going for method chaining concept. Set of cell value. Here I'm setting the value. First value is ID. Similarly, I'm going to create cell 1, cell 2. ID, name and price. Course ID, course name, course price. So in a row I'm creating 3 cells. Cell index 1, cell index 2, 0, 1, 2. So with that, header row will be created and header data will be stored into that. Next one. Once the header row is created, now I need to create the data rows and I need to set the data. Row 0 already taken for the header. Now actual data should be stored in the remaining rows from the first row onwards, the row index 1. How we are going to do that? For this, I'm going to take first integer row index, data row index is equal to 1. Row index 0 already taken for header row. Data row will start from first index. Data row index is equal to 1 and I'm going to take for each loop list of courses available. Let me take each course from the courses. Now I need to create one row to store the data. How to create a row? Here already we have a sheet object, sheet dot create row based on data row index. Based on the data row index. Now data row is created. Inside this data row we need to set the data. Data row dot create cell. Cell index, always every row cell will start with 0. Create cell of 0 dot set cell value. I want to set course dot get course ID. Similarly, data row dot create cell of cell 1 dot set cell value of course dot get course name. Course dot get course name. Good. Next one. Data row dot create cell of cell index 2 dot set cell value. I need to set the price. Good. Course dot get course price. I'm setting this. Now row index 0 I have taken for storing header data, and in that header row 0th cell, first cell, second cell. That means in one row 3 cells will be created like this: ID, name, price. Then my data will be stored in this row, data will be stored in this row, data will be stored in this row. Like this, data rows will be created. So in every row cell indexes will be available: 0, 1, 2. Again second data, second record, 0, 1, 2, like that. Fine. Once first row data is created, once first data row is created, I need to increment the data row for the second record. Data row index plus plus. I'm using increment operator in order to increment that row index. First record will be created in the first row. It is going to store the data in the first row in the 3 cells. Once the first record is inserted in that row, then I'm increasing row index. Then it is going to take second row to store the second record. To take third row for third record. For fourth record, fourth row will be considered. Like this row index I am deciding here as 1. Then I am incrementing that for every new record. Once this concept is done, then we need to store this Excel data to a Excel file, and that file we need to send in the response. For that, I am going to get output stream. Here already I have taken HTTP servlet response as a parameter. Response dot get servlet output stream. Response dot get output stream. I am getting servlet output stream as a parameter. I mean as a return type. Get output stream method is giving me output stream object. Output stream object. Once that output stream object we got, then let me use workbook dot write of output stream. So whatever the data is available in the workbook, I'm writing that data to output stream. Okay guys, once it is done, I'm doing workbook dot close. I'm closing the workbook and I'm closing output stream as well. So this is the method which will read the data from the database table, which will create one Excel workbook. In that workbook it will create one sheet. In that sheet it will create one row. That row, first row is called as a data row. First row index is 0. Once the first row is created with the data, then I am creating data rows by using the data available in the collection. If you get 10 records from the table, 10 data rows will be created. If you get 30 records from the table, 30 rows will be created. For every record, one row will be created based on row index. Once the rows creation is completed with the cells, then we are creating output stream object from the response. That output stream object we are using and we are writing the workbook data to that output stream. Once writing the data portion is completed, then we are closing the workbook, then we are closing our output stream. Got it? Fine. Now let us create one REST controller in order to access this service layer method. Report REST controller I am going to create. Report REST controller. REST controller will talk to our service layer method. So let us inject service object here. Private report service through auto wiring. I'm using @auto-wide annotation. Here REST controller, I'm using @REST controller. Inside the REST controller, let us write a method so that we can make a request to that method. Then it will download the Excel file for us. Now let me create the REST controller method. That REST controller method I will bind it to a GET request. Public void generate Excel report. Okay. Now for this method, I'm taking one parameter as HTTP servlet response. We need the response object to send the data. When my method is expecting HTTP servlet response, so whenever that springboot IOC container is loading our classes and when the request comes to that springboot application, it will understand that my method is expecting HTTP servlet response. So response object will be created by our dispatcher servlet here and it is going to pass that response object as a parameter to this method. This method I am binding to a GET request @get mapping, binding to a URL /Excel. That's it. Good. Now let us call our service layer method report service dot generate Excel by passing the response object. That's it. Now this method is throwing one exception. So let me use throws keyword, throws exception. Perfect. I'm calling my service layer method. Good. Whatever the record that we are generating, that record should be stored into response object. That record, whatever the file that is generating, that file should be downloaded whenever we send a request to this REST controller method, right? For that we need to set the content type. How the response is going to send, response dot set content type. We need to set the content type as a key content type that is going to represent in which format we are sending the response to the client. Application /octet stream. We are going to send the response as a stream, octet stream. That file will be generated, file should be sent to the client. And we need to set response header also. For that we are going to use key and value, string header key and header value. How we are going to send it? That data we are going to send as a file attachment, right? Content disposition, that is the key we are going to write, and header value, I want to send this value as an attachment. So what is the name that you want to use for the attachment? You can give file name is equal to courses.xls. That's it. Now let us send this response dot set header, key and value. Header key is available and a header value is available. That's it. So this is my REST controller class. I'm using @REST control annotation. And in this REST controller, I'm injecting my service by using auto wiring. I'm writing one get request method. In this get request method, I'm taking response object as a parameter. Dispatcher servlet will call our controller method. Then it will pass the response object as a parameter. Response content type I'm setting as octet stream because this method is responsible to download the Excel file. I'm setting the response header content disposition as a attachment. The response should be sent as a file attachment with a courses.xls. Set header, I'm doing that. Finally, I'm calling my service method by passing the response object. Good, save this. Let me update my project Maven update. Yeah, project is getting updated. Once project update completed, let us run this application. Right click, run as boot application. Our application is getting started. Yeah, fine guys, with this our application got started. Spring Boot will use embedded server Apache Tomcat. Apache Tomcat is running on the port number 8080. Now let's go to browser and let's make a request to our application and see whether Excel report is getting generated or not. So I'm going to open browser. Now here let us make a request. Localhost colon 8080/Excel. Localhost colon 8080/Excel. I'm hitting this URL and let us see what is the response that we are going to get from our application. Send the request. When I send a request, now see in the database query got executed. That means it is retrieving records from the database table, and let us see what is the response that we are getting from our application. Thanks for watching this video. You can find the source code in the GitHub repository. Please subscribe to our channel and click on bell icon for upcoming videos.